All right, this is the PowerPoint I'm going to have the kids take notes on about conditional statements, and this is going to happen for me pretty quickly after the name animation design challenge is finished, and it's going to lead into coding challenges and debugging challenges that require conditional statements. I think one of the first ones that I'm going to be using is the red light, green light, but there's also things like the changing dot and those different ones that are going to require the use of these conditional statements. And this is going to be a big leap in their programming abilities because there's going to be so much stuff that they have to learn here, and it's going to open up a whole new avenue to them about how programming can work. Please understand that before we get into this, what I have done is made sure that my students have been exposed to logic quite a bit through things like plexers or syllogisms or matrix logic or the weight logic math stuff, and they explicitly have been talked about if-then statements. So for example, when we work with plexers and we're reading through the clues, I always, besides the information that is simply given, I require the students to present their information or what they have seen in an if-then statement, so they can get used to how they are created, and sometimes even with the plexers that there are two conditions. So if blank and blank, then this particular thing happens. And I think that will make the transition to the conditional statements that are used in programming a little bit easier. So the first thing we do is review and kind of start giving the flavor of how they are different in computer programming, because in this case we're not just talking about beliefs or ideas, we're talking about that actions are dependent upon a set of conditions. And so I gave them two examples of something that would be an if-then or in some form of conditional framework. Then we talk about how these conditional statements are made up of a condition and an action, and a condition in this case we are talking about defining it as a set of circumstances or characteristics that must be true for the action to trigger. That is a really, really important understanding, that the condition has to be true to happen. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go over a bunch of examples and get a chance to see how they look, these conditional statements, and how they can identify the condition and the action. And each one of these statements that we go through kind of models a different type of logic that's behind one of the conditional statements that we'll be using in Scratch. So for example, in this one, once you finish your homework, you play a video game for 1 hour. You can see there's a condition there, and then we have the action that will result if the condition is true. And then we have this one, keep doing push-ups until you've done 15. Well, our condition is until you've done 15 of them. Once that is true, then you can stop that action. So you're going to keep doing it until you have done 15 of them. Or this one at 3 o'clock, so when 3 o'clock is true, you can go outside and swim. Or in this one, you have to keep memorizing until the condition is true that you have them completely memorized. If you take out the trash, you can watch some TV. If you don't, you're grounded. Notice in this one, it's got two actions and two conditions. This is kind of our if-then-else statement. You need to wait patiently until your parents arrive, so you have an action and a condition. Notice sometimes the condition comes in front, sometimes the action comes in front, and it's important for them to understand just to be able to identify those so they can think logically through these things. One of the things we want to talk about and start once again adding more flavor into how it's seen in computer programming is that they are actions. And so the conditions must be true for certain scripts to run. And so that's what conditional statements do. So if this condition is true, then run this script. And if it's not true, then it won't run that script, or it will do something else. So with our conditional statements, we basically have three different varieties. We have wait, repeat loops, or if-then. And if we look in Scratch, we can see all of these are under the control panel, and these are the different ones that fall in those different categories. We'll go over each one of these independently. So with the wait command, we are going to wait until that condition is true. So in this one, it's going to wait until this amount of time that has elapsed is true. So this one will wait for 1 second. Of course, they can put in any number they want, even rational numbers like decimals. Over here, they can wait until this condition is true. Now you notice it's got this little hexagonal bit here. We will actually drop another block in there to define what that condition is. And so the condition is going to be dropped right there, and you can see we're going to predominantly use the ones from the sensing menu. There are some in operators, there are some in data, they're elsewhere, but right now all we're going to be doing is worrying about these. And so we would actually drag and drop them in, and you can see they fit the shape there, and then some of them have these little down arrows that we can choose what they want. So whether wait until it's touching, whether it's the mouse pointer or another sprite touching a color, or if this color is touching this color. By the way, to change this color, what you would do is you'd click on the square in Scratch and it'll show a little hand, and you actually have to move around the screen and click the color that is seen on the screen. It does not open up a menu. It's kind of like the eyedropper tool we talked about in the drawing and editing a sprite video. Or you can wait for a certain key to be pressed, or if the mouse button is clicked, and that's what mouse down means. Okay, and so you drop it in here. So for example, this one will say wait until the space bar is pressed, wait until the mouse pointer is touching the sprite, or whatever it happens to be that this command is in, and wait till this color is touching that color. Repeat loops are they're a little bit different, and so you are waiting until the condition at the top of the loop is true if it's to leave the loop. So it's going to continue doing what's inside the loop as long as the condition is false. So you have to remember that. It's always going to leave the loop when the condition is true. Okay. At the end of the loop, so for example, in one where it just has a number counter, at the end of the loop, it's going to add 1 to the counter number. Okay. If we look at it kind of mathematically, we're going to think about this. This is going to continue to, it's asking the question, repeat until, or it's asking, the condition is repeat until the counter equals 10. So when you first enter the loop, the counter is at 0. When it gets down to the bottom, it adds 1. And then it goes back up here to check the condition. Since it's 1 and not 10, then it keeps going through here. Once this gets and goes from 9 and adds 1 to 10, and it says, hey, I'm 10, it's going to skip everything in here and then just jump down here. So it always checks it at the beginning, and at that point when it checks at the beginning, it makes the decision, do I do this stuff inside the loop or do I skip and go down? The forever loop is basically a counter loop, and you're adding 1 to the counter. However, the question says, hey, keep repeating until you have reached infinity, and since that will never happen, you are going to just continue that forever. Notice at the bottom of the forever loop there is no little puzzle piece, so you cannot add any scripting below it, because you will never achieve this to be true, and therefore you will never get out of this loop. Or you have the one where you're going to choose what you want a different condition is going to be, and so this is going to continue repeating until this particular condition is true. Okay, and once again, it checks the condition at the beginning of the loop. Now that, I don't want to go too far into detail with the students at this point, and I don't, but that can cause some timing issues, because it might take some actual time to do whatever script steps are in here. And if the condition is met while it's doing the script steps that's inside the loop, and it's not checking at that time, this condition is still considered false, because it only asks whether the condition is true or not when it gets back to the top of the loop. Now, how does that look? So for example, if we're repeating till the space key is pressed, you notice we have 3 steps here. If at any point in time I press the space bar in this loop, and then I let go of the space bar before it comes back around here, it will still register this as false and go through it. The space bar has to be being pressed at the time that it checks. And so in this case, you would have to hold the space bar down to get out of this loop unless you luckily hit it at the right time. I would not get that in. I would not talk about that too much with the kids, because I don't want to confuse them about the timing with this stuff. That's going to come later in some of the other challenges that we look at. So the basic idea is, here's the questions it asks us. Is the space key pressed? Nope. Then do these commands. If it is pressed, then yes. Then go skip and do whatever the commands are down there. Now, if-then statements are a little bit different, and you can see that what happens is it asks, is this condition true? If the condition is true, it does whatever's in here. It's kind of a little bit backwards from the loop. So if it's true, it does this. If it's not true, it skips it and does whatever's down here. So, for example, if the space key is pressed, when it comes down through this scripting, if the space key is pressed, well then do this once. That's important. It's different than a loop, so it does it once, and then if it's not, it does this and then continues on with the script. Lots of times we're going to use if statements in conjunction with loops, because over here, this is a key understanding I want my students to get into, and I'm going to just introduce it, just in the beginning stages here, is that when I press the green flag, it asks this one time, like super supremely quickly because it's moving as fast as the computer is going to go. If it's true, it'll do turn 15 degrees one time and be done. Because remember, once this is true, it does this and then exits the if statement. If it's false, it just, skips that and it doesn't do anything. Over here, you can see that it's continually asking the question, and it's always looking for whether the space key is pressed. It's kind of this difference. This one says, is the space bar pressed? And this one asks it over and over and over forever. And the speed with which it asks it is only dictated by how fast the computer can go. So you could imagine like the fastest auctioneer ever asking this question. And it's asking it so fast. It's asking it on the order of, with a simple if statement like this within a loop, it's probably asking it in the order of thousands of times a second almost. And so it's just going to go so fast. And so this will help us that every time we press the space bar, it's going to turn 15 degrees because it's going to do that so quickly. So in the if then else statements, it's going to give us the opportunity to distinguish between whether it's true or false and have different actions for both. So it's going to say, is this condition true? If it is, then do this part. If it's not true, then do this part, and then move on down to here. Okay, so same thing here. If the space bar is pressed, turn 15 degrees, do that once. If it's not, then move 10 steps, and then it will then move on down to whatever script steps we have over here. Once again, we probably want to put it in a forever loop, so what it's going to do in this one, it would be kind of a weird bit of programming, but if the space bar is pressed, every time it checks, it'll turn 15 degrees. If it's not, it's going to move 10 steps. So you could see if you had a sprite on the screen and you weren't pressing the space bar, it would just kind of move right across the screen 10 steps each time. If as soon as you stop it, or as soon as you press the space key, it'll stop moving and it'll start turning in that 15-degree increments. Here's some examples, and so I put all the different script steps over here. And if I wanted to do this, well, I'm sorry, I gave them an example of what I wanted them to do, and we looked at how it would look. So the sprite should keep changing colors until S key is pressed. So repeat until S key is pressed, change color. Every time the mouse pointer touches the sprite, it should rotate 15 degrees. So the point is what would you choose here? So every time the mouse pointer touches the sprite, it should rotate 15 degrees. And you can see it's going to be one of those. If it's touching the mouse pointer, turn 15 degrees, and you notice it's every time, so we have to have a forever loop in there looking for it all the time. If the sprite is touching the color red, a scream sound should be played. If it's not touching red, a meow sound should be played, and you can see that's going to be an if then else. So if it's touching red, then play that scream. If it's not, play the meow, and you're going to see that it's going to keep doing that forever and ever. Now, this is just a slide I added at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. What I'm going to planning on doing is having these kids cut them out and then cut them down into strips, and so they can actually tape these in their notes so they can take notes and have those things right there.